Today we're going to take a look at how to use Azure Automation Runbooks for scheduling PowerShell files against SharePoint Online. As admins of SharePoint Online and M365, we have a need to run regular PowerShell scripts, but Software as a Service, SaaS, doesn't provide that feature. However, Azure can. So in the PaaS world, Platform as a Service, we have the ability to schedule and run PowerShell files. So we might start out by looking at our SharePoint Online tenant in M365. And here we have different things like site collections, right? We're going to have user data. We're going to have document libraries. We're going to have document libraries, lists, etc. As part of that SharePoint Online environment, we have an admin URL, and that's going to be whatever your prefix is, -admin.sharepoint.com. Within that, we can create an app ID and secret that are granted permissions tenant-wide. This app account can see everything in the tenant. Now, in the middle, we're going to have an Azure automation account. So we go over to our Azure portal, we create an automation account, and within that is a runbook, one or many runbooks. A runbook will host a PowerShell file. And finally, we're going to have the PowerShell script itself. So what does this script need to do? What's essentially the logic? The logging, the modules, maybe some credentials, some sort of PowerShell PMP commandlets. What are the different functions and features that PS1 needs to do? Now the PS1 we can create locally, and we can actually follow the red pathway here, going direct from the PowerShell into SharePoint Online. But ultimately, we want to schedule it in a runbook and go more of the green pathway down here at the bottom. So 3 components, SharePoint Online, an automation runbook, and a PowerShell script. Number 1, we go over to our SharePoint Online tenant. We come into our admin URL here, and we visit the app reg new page. Now, app reg new is where you create a new app. We can go ahead and hit the generate button. And now that we've hit the generate button, we get a GUID number for the app, which I'm going to copy and keep in the background, and the client secret for the app, which I'm also going to copy, keep in the background. The app itself we'll call SPO Storage. For domain, we can simply put the word localhost twice and hit create. This is creating an app identity with a client secret, a form of a password, and that's how we can get access to the data in SharePoint Online as our source. Now our end goal is to schedule an email once a day that tells us about the sites we have on the tenant, how much storage they're using, and who the owner is, and the template that they were created with. So just a simple once a day email, here are the sites in your SharePoint Online tenant. That's what we're trying to accomplish. Here you can see that it's been created, so we'll take all of that good stuff and copy it in the background. Next, we want to take the ID and come over here to a different page. This is App Invite. App Invite is where you grant permissions for the app. So we'll go ahead and put in the app and click Lookup. The Lookup button will pre-fill information about the app itself. And now we're ready to grant permissions. Now, the permissions manifest down here, the XML data, is a description of what permission rights are needed. There's a really cool blog post out here by Summit. It covers a little bit of that. Here's a full control for tenant. You can see full control in the middle and tenant for the scope. This is the one we're going to use. Let's go ahead and copy that, bring it over here, and we'll click create. Now we get this trust dialog. Do you trust this app called SPO Storage? And do you want it to have full control of all site collections? Yes, we do. We'll click Trust. And finally, we can go to the Site Settings page and check out Site App Permissions. Go in here to see an enumeration of any apps we've created in the past. There it is, and there's the GUID number for it. Cool, so we know it went through. Next, we come over to our local VS Code where we're working on our PowerShell script for what we want it to do, what we want it to accomplish, what's kind of the purpose of the whole thing. And we'll roll through a code tour here real quick. We're loading a couple modules, the PMP commands for SharePoint Online, The utility namespace, which has an HTML function, it can basically take a collection, rows and columns, and turn it into an HTML table. After that, we have some stuff about reading credentials in Azure. We'll use this in just a minute. For right now, we're going to hard code our credentials for kind of a local test. This is more of the red pathway we showed early in the video, that we're going direct from VS Code to SharePoint Online. Does this PowerShell code work? Does it do what we need to? And the reason you'd want to go to direct is for breakpoints and logging. By the way, we do have some logging. We had the word start, and at the bottom, we had the word finish. So we're going to connect to the tenant, and here's the real essential piece. Get PnP tenant site and select some of the data. So we're getting data about the storage, the owner, the email, if the site's locked, what template was used. We're getting a table that's an inventory of what sites are on the tenant. We're going to format that. We're going to get a little bit CSS ready for making the HTML look sharp. That's all kind of a visual thing. We are going to export it to CSV. So we're going to create a Excel file to use as an attachment on the email. And here's an interesting one. This is part of that utility namespace from above. This is going to create basically from a collection in PowerShell, right, to an HTML table with the CSS. It's a pretty cool little command, convert to HTML. It makes a beautiful table out of the rows and columns. Then I added a little piece, we're using the measure object, basically to run a total for the total storage, just how much data is on the SharePoint Online tenant. And finally, to send an email from PowerShell in an Azure Runbook using SharePoint Online, Office 365, we're not really going to use SharePoint Online. We're going to be using Exchange Online. And send mail message is an SMTP command. So this is your standard TCP port 25 for SMTP routing, but that's Exchange Online. That's Microsoft's SMTP server. To use that, we need to give an account that has a license to send an email message. Somebody that's part of your, not your SharePoint Online environment, but really your Exchange Online environment. Someone in the tenant that could send and receive mail. So you want to use get credential and provide some sort of an account that can send email. And of course, we have recipient and subject and body and all that good stuff. And finally, way off on the right here, attachment, CSV. That's where we're going to actually attach the spreadsheet to the email. So some really cool features. That's a tour of what the code is supposed to do. Let's go ahead and run it. In order to run it, we need to put in our app ID and secret that we just created using app-reg-new and app-invite. So we'll go ahead and get those in, and we'll hit F. And here we can see a list of data coming back with some of the sites, if they're locked, the amount of storage used. So this is our table of all the data we want to see, and it's prompting us for a username on this particular tenant. And that's happening down here with get credential. In the end, we're going to use Azure's credential storage. So Azure Runbooks, or I guess Azure Automation, has a credential feature with Secure Store that's where we really want to be for using our credential. But right now, we're going to use the get credential command, and this is going to prompt more for kind of the local debug experience. So that's what we're seeing right now. We'll go ahead and put in username and password. All right, cool. And we can see the script completed because we see the word finish. And the reason I'm doing this really is that I can look up here and see the lack of an error. That things ran successfully. We went through the whole process and there was no error message. So I like having start and finish on the log. Bringing up email, we do have a table here with a CSV. We can see our subject line. We've got the attachment. We've got the HTML table with kind of like shading and border. So there's some cool stuff going on there with the CSS. We have our storage and templates. And then down here, this was sort of that append from the measure object command as a way of getting a sum on the storage. But pretty cool stuff that we did receive an email, and we're using SharePoint Online to get the data and Exchange Online to send an email message. The whole thing is being run out of a PowerShell file. This one text file, small too, less than 60 lines, a small PowerShell file that gets the data, formats it, and sends a message. Really cool stuff. We can hit F5, it runs, it works really well. Now we want to move this into Azure for schedule. Over here on our Azure portal, what we're going to do is search for the word automation. And our very first match is going to have like a lightning bolt gear icon, and this is the Azure automation account from Microsoft. That's the one we need. We'll go ahead and do, and here we pick out settings, we give it a name and a resource group, mark the run as account to no, and then we can hit the create button. All right, with our automation account created, we can navigate in to see the settings. Up here in the top left, you'll see the word automation account, again with the gear and lightning bolt. The important parts here, there's a couple of them down the left menu, are going to be Runbook, Module, and Credential. Runbook is where we put our PS1 for the actual source code. Module is where we import things like PMP. And Credential, this is where we're going to put two items actually. We're going to put the app ID and secret, and then we're also going to put the Exchange Online user. That was for SMTP to send the mail. We don't really want passwords in our source code. We're going to put them here in Credentials. Do this the right way. So let's go ahead and create a runbook. We'll give it a name. I'm going to name it the same thing as the automation account. And I'm going to select PowerShell for the type. There's some other things here. We don't really need those right now. We'll just say PowerShell, hit create. All right, with the runbook created, we'll paste in all of that beautiful code that we had locally, but we are going to change one important piece. Down here on the credential storage, we're not using get credential, which if you remember was the interactive prompt with the pop-up window. Instead, we want to use the Azure credential storage. So let's go ahead and turn off the old one, turn on the new one, make a note of this description, go ahead and save it. That's cool. Yes, we'll come up here and grab a hold of the credential storage. We're going to make a new credential and we're going to give it a username. All right, we put in our credential. We gave it a kind of a label that we'll be using. Go ahead and hit create. There it is. Excellent. And over here on modules, we need to tell it about third-party modules we're using. So we'll come over to the gallery, put in PMP. This is the one we need, the PowerShell, PowerShell patterns and practices online. Looks good. We'll do the import command, let that run. While that's processing, I can come back over and check out my credentials again. I want to add one more credential, and this other one is going to be for the app identity. That avoiding the app ID and secret in the code, we can actually take that GUID number as if it were a username, the client secret as if it were a password. Go ahead and put those over and hit create. All right, cool. So now we have both SharePoint Online for source data, Exchange Online for sending email. Both credentials are in the automation container, that outer layer. If we edit the runbook, see a couple different things here. I'm going to go and delete these and then turn on this block of code. What this is doing is it's reading the credential the same way as the one did down below. But then it goes a little bit further with the password and it makes an unsecure string out of it in order to provide plain text, because the command that's using the connection here, that one actually wants plain text for the secret. So we're doing a little bit of a conversion here, and there's a reference to how with an article. We'll go ahead and publish our runbook again. There it is. Awesome. All right, and taking a look at our imported module, we just want to make sure that this shows fully imported with the commands available. Now we can go ahead and click Start to execute the runbook. When you start a runbook, there's going to be a couple of tabs available. Input, output, errors, the status is queued. There's an ID number for that instance. It tells you a little bit about the timing. And what ultimately we'll see is the results of the script on the Output tab. Okay, now double checking the code, there's actually a difference here. It's not an Azure automation credential. It's a get automation PS credential. So there's a slightly different command. I had them mixed up. Interestingly, there's more than one valid command. But get automation PS credential. We want to get automation PS credential. Update both of those commands. We'll go ahead and republish this and run it again. We'll hit start and then yes. That submits the runbook. We can see it queued up for execution. Beautiful. Now we can see it completed, and on the Output tab, we have our username, we've got our client ID and secret. Here's all of our SharePoint Online data. This was our saved credential that we did for the app ID and secret. And if we come down a little more, we can see more with the username that it wants to send for email. And yeah, the full script running. And finally, we want to see the word finish come out on the log. That lets us know it completed. And pulling up fresh email, we have a brand new message with the CSV, the subject line, the HTML table, the footer with the sum, all of the different components that we were able to see locally, but now this one is scheduled in the cloud. So we can run this with a high availability configuration, multiple data centers, all that good stuff. One thing we did not do was turn on a schedule, which is pretty straightforward. Come in here to schedule, put daily at 7 p.m. Go ahead and type that in. Click on our settings. We'll make it recurring every 1 day, no expiration, and hit create. So there it is. That's the schedule. On the Runbook, you have to associate them. There's a little button here called Link to Schedule. So just because you have a Runbook, just because you have a schedule, doesn't mean that they're connected together, which is actually useful because you can have more than one Runbook and you could put them on the same shared schedule. So the schedule is not a property of the Runbook. It's more of a linked connection. And here we have our history of all the executions. You can come in to edit the code, adjust the schedule, view the logging. That's a tour of Azure Automation and how we can use scheduled PowerShell to better manage SharePoint Online. Thanks for watching.